An underwater event has to happen, such as usually an earthquake or a sudden displacement of matter that then creates a displacement of water. And here, as a tsunami wave approaches the shore, it first decreases in speed, but then increases in size, and eventually it ends up delivering a huge amount of water and can last for anywhere from a few hours to possibly even a few days. So this is tsunamis in a nutshell. But by using a computer modeling simulation and by trying to analyze what happens around black holes, the scientists behind this paper right here were able to work out that a very similar event could actually happen around black holes, but instead of water in this case, it would be gas. A lot of gas. Tremendous amounts of gas. Although in this case, it's also important to kind of try to figure out how all of this looks like in terms of structure. So we're still sort of learning about black holes, and we're still trying to understand what sort of happens in their vicinity. For smaller black holes, it's usually a little bit different than for massive black holes, and so it's obviously not clear if this happens around all of the black holes. But for a supermassive black hole such as the one in the center of the Milky Way, or for any massive black hole over 1 million masses of the Sun, they will usually start forming relatively similar structures. If simplified, it might look something like this. There's going to be an accretion disk, or more like an accretion torus around it. It's also going to produce the corona visible right here, and it's also going to have a lot of wind outflow. So this is sort of the simple version of what's known as the active galactic nucleus. But the picture does get a little bit more complex as you move away from the center of the black hole and as you start seeing what else is going on in the vicinity of the accretion disk and around the accretion disk. For example, first of all, around the disk there is a huge torus of a lot of different cold gas that doesn't actually fall into the black hole and sort of orbits around this region without really being affected by the black hole itself. And because this gas can be really thick, it's usually almost impossible for the scientists to actually see the black hole itself or to try to peer through the thickness of the disk to see the insides. Now at the same time, right above the accretion disk, there's actually a tremendous amount of really hot plasma, very similar stuff to what we find inside our sun. And a lot of this super hot plasma orbits far enough from the black hole that it's not going to fall into the black hole, but it also produces a lot of different X-ray radiation. In the past, these X-ray emissions have even been used to try to map the region of a black hole by seeing various reflections from the accretion disk itself. And these regions are so incredibly bright in the X-rays that they're visible from really far away in the universe. But at the same time, these emissions are sort of responsible for what's known as the outflow. Sort of like the solar wind, but in this case it's a black hole wind that's moving extremely fast. And so it's sort of believed that it creates something like this. There's a lot of dust coming out from this side. It also creates a kind of a torus that orbits as far away as 100 light years away from the black hole itself. And it also creates a really large region of cold dust, some of which has also been proposed to be a region where new stars and possibly even new planets can form. In other words, it's a really intriguing and super interesting region that a lot of scientists would love to see one day. But because of this really powerful outflow from the center, the power coming from these X-rays and from the gas outflow can actually create some really interesting effects in the region around the black hole. And so here the scientists were able to model what probably happens around a typical massive black hole if it does have a really thick region of this cold dust around it. So first of all, it's already been established that there are probably a lot of different types of clouds and a lot of different types of dust in the region around a massive active black hole, including what's known as the clumpy outflow that the scientists believe is created by the sudden X-ray emissions from the accretion disk itself of the massive black hole. And it's also believed that a lot of these clouds, a lot of this gas, is extremely hot, possibly 50,000 degrees Celsius or about 10 times as hot as our own sun. But slightly farther away, at a distance of maybe about 10 to 100 light years away from the black hole, in the region of this cold dust right here, this is actually where we start finding a lot of different turbulence and a lot of different activity very similar to what you expect from here on planet Earth. So first of all, a lot of different kinds of waves start to form. For example, the so-called Kármán vortex street. The unusual waves you can see simulated right here formed in various gases and in various liquids. Although in this case, the size of these vortices would be huge. Each of them would be approximately 1 light year across. Moreover, as this clumpy outflow starts hitting some of this cold gas located around the black hole, the shear pressure from the interaction sort of has a very similar effect to what you see right here. it essentially is responsible for creating some sort of a tsunami gas wave. And so the interaction between these really hot emissions and the cold gas that's already there ends up producing tsunami waves that could be up to 10 light years in size, or maybe even more if the black hole is bigger and if there's more gas around it. But because of the distances involved here, all of this of course takes a really long time. Even at the fastest possible speed of movement of about 20% the speed of light, it would take hundreds of years for all of this interaction to start producing these waves, and then probably thousands of years for this gas to form a tsunami. So this right here represents an extremely slow process and something that we will probably never be able to see in actual real time. We can maybe only see the waves after they've already been created, or possibly detect the interaction between the super fast moving hot gas and the relatively slow moving cold gas. And the scientists in this paper believe that both the tsunami waves and the Kármán vortex street structures start being formed across this entire region hundreds of light years away from the central black hole. Which of course means that if we were to somehow be able to see what a typical supermassive black hole looks like from, let's just say, 1,000 light years away from us, at the moment this image right here might actually show us what it really looks like, at least in terms of the artistic illustration. Although chances are it's also a lot more bright, it's also a lot more active in a lot of different other ways, and there are probably a lot of other structures we haven't really considered yet. But what's interesting about this study is that it's able to provide the explanation for the creation of these waves, while at the same time suggesting that the magnetic fields do not play as much of a role in this case in propelling the gas across the black hole region and in creating a lot of the outflow from the black hole itself. We do know that the magnetic fields here are pretty strong, but in this case they were able to explain this by actually ignoring the magnetic fields, which of course means that depending on the strength of the magnetic field, there could be a lot of other effects and a lot of other formations that have not been considered in this paper or in some other papers before that. But more importantly, this is still just a hypothesis and still just a proposition. None of this of course has been physically observed, but the scientists believe that by using some of the new telescopes, including some of the more advanced X-ray telescopes that are going to be operational in the next few years, with the mission known as XRISM being of particular interest in this case, we might actually have enough resolution to be able to see what exactly happens around these regions and how exactly the X-rays from a typical supermassive black hole end up influencing the gas on the outskirts. Or in other words, even though the idea behind black hole tsunamis sounds absolutely incredible, it still could be just an idea, just a hypothesis that could be proven wrong. Nevertheless, it's still a really cool proposition and something that I'm definitely going to be covering in some of the future videos. Until then, thank you for watching, subscribe if you still haven't, share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, and maybe come back tomorrow to learn something else. Maybe support this channel on Patreon by joining the channel membership or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.
How far can you follow a compass needle? As far as the North Bay?
Hello wonderful person, this is Anton.
Why should you invest in stocks on eToro?
With eToro, I can invest in stocks with zero commission.
eToro's got a wide variety of global and local stocks. Buy in bulk or just a fraction. It's your choice.
If you're new to investing, you can train risk-free with $100,000 in a virtual portfolio and up.
When I want investment ideas, I just check out my feed to see what other traders are doing.
I'd look into tech stocks.
I'm more into the energy sector.
3 words. Large cap companies.
What's more, eToro lets me copy the trading activity of other traders.
From now on, whenever I make a trade,
I make the same trade automatically, even when I'm out here.
Join over 20 million users and invest in stocks for zero commission on eToro, the world's leading social trading and investing platform.
Hello InfoPrison, this is Anton, and today we're going to be talking about some new incredible discoveries coming from our beautiful neighbor Mars. But this time not from the surface or from the atmosphere of Mars, this time from inside Mars. Because for the first time ever, the scientists have been able to analyze the structure, the internal structure of another planet. Being able to precisely measure the size of the crust, the size of the mantle, and the approximate size of the inner core as well. And even more or less determining what all of these parts are made out of, which was actually the main purpose for the InSight probe you see right here that is still sort of functioning on Mars even today. And so let's talk a little bit more about this, because it's been a really good year for Mars and so many new things have been discovered in the last few months. But first of all, this probe right here. Originally when the InSight probe was launched, I personally wasn't really sure how this mission is going to go. For example, I knew back then that there is not going to be a lot of public interest in this mission because it's not going to be producing a lot of high quality images, and it's also unlikely to make any groundbreaking discoveries. At the same time, even within the first few weeks and few months of operation, it started to experience major problems. And so we weren't really sure if this probe is going to survive for as long as it did. But looks like I was kind of proven wrong. It did discover something the scientists were hoping to find after at least a few years of operation. It was able to successfully analyze and of course discover exactly what happens inside the planet, inside Mars. And it did so by listening to various Mars quakes. The quakes very similar to earthquakes that essentially produce two different types of waves. The compressional waves, also known as P waves, that propagate by pressing things together and increasing the density inside a typical object, and the shear waves, also known as S waves, that create a kind of an up and down motion as you see right here. The scientists have been studying these types of waves on Earth for a very long time, over 100 years as a matter of fact. And it generally took the scientists approximately 100 years or so to work out how to use the differences in speed of these different waves while also listening to the reflection of these waves as they move inside the mantle and the core and as they reflect from various irregularities on the inside, to eventually figure out what exactly is happening inside our own planet with extreme precision. And so by using the observations from planet Earth and using decades of experience of listening to these waves, during the Apollo missions the scientists have also been able to work out how to use this on the moon to precisely measure the internal structure of our own satellite. Although in this case it did take them roughly around 4 decades or so. But now, after only a few years of listening for various waves on Mars, the scientists have been able to work out exactly what happens inside Mars as well, making this a pretty important and pretty exciting discovery after all. But first, the probe itself. As you might have heard from some of the previous videos, in the last few months the probe has been struggling to survive. Unfortunately, because of the accumulation of dust on the solar panels, within only a year the panels went from being this to being almost entirely covered by dust. And though initially the probe was able to generate approximately 5,000 watt-hours of power, a week ago this has decreased to only about 700 watt-hours, which means that about 80% of power is no longer being generated. And to try to solve this, the NASA scientists have already tried so many different things. For example, they tried to shake off all of this dust by trying to vibrate and pulsate the solar array deployment motors, but unfortunately this was not very successful. It didn't really do as much as they thought it would do. Then, only a few months ago, they tried something a little bit different, actually something really brilliant. They tried to place or try to trickle a little bit of sand by using this excavating device you see right here, and by doing this, some of the dust was actually dislodged by the sand. But when they tried to do this second and third time, the effects were much less dramatic, and so this was also unfortunately not really helping anything. And so because of this, the future of this mission is currently not really certain. It still has enough energy to listen to different earthquakes and to possibly do very minor experiments, but for anything major it no longer has enough power. But despite of this, the SEIS that you see right here, also known as the Seismic Experiment for Interior Structure, was able to record close to 800 different Marsquakes, in the last couple of years. And this of course allowed the scientists to very thoroughly study the structure of Mars, at least from the region where the probe was located. And this is actually the other interesting fact about this. The probe is located in this region known as the Elysium Planitia, the region very close to this feature known as the Cerberus Fossa. And it just so happens that the vast majority of all earthquakes that were detected by the mission came from this unusual region. Now here's what Cerberus Fossa looks like. It's an unusual formation of these fissure-like structures you see right here that looks sort of like this on the inside. In the last few years, this region has been officially identified as a seismically and tectonically active region, with some sort of an outflow happening 2 to maybe 10 million years ago, and even some recent volcanic deposits being as young as only 50,000 years, implying of course that Mars might have been volcanically active relatively recently. Now these strange formations are approximately 1200 kilometers across, and today the scientists believe that whatever formed them very likely resulted in a huge outflow of some sort of a liquid. Now a lot of scientists think that it's probably water. Liquid water that most likely escaped from these fissures and spread across a very large area, creating these new formations you see all over the place here. But the opposing theory to this is that maybe it's actually not water. It could have also been lava, or possibly even a mixture of both. Lava may be followed by liquid water, and because of this, this is an extremely intriguing region that could potentially help scientists resolve a lot of mysteries about Mars. But as I mentioned, a lot of the earthquakes were coming from this region, which is actually really surprising because the scientists originally expected that most earthquakes would be coming from the region known as Tarsus that has the biggest volcanoes in the solar system, including Olympus Mons you see right here. But compared to earthquakes, a lot of these Marsquakes were extremely weak in power, only about 3 to 4 in magnitude. And this is actually because Mars does not have tectonic plates like Earth, and the tectonic plates are the reason for most earthquakes. On Mars, the actual Marsquakes are caused by the fact that, well, the planet is still cooling down, and as it cools down, it sort of shrinks in size, and this shrinking causes the outer crust to slowly shrink in size and to start cracking on the outside. And as these cracks form around the surface, they start producing various Marsquakes. And so after a few years and listening to nearly 800 different Marsquakes, 35 of these Marsquakes were actually very useful for analyzing the internal structure. And they provided all of the necessary data for the 3 papers that you can find in the description below, with each of the papers essentially focusing on the individual part of the Martian structure, the crust, the mantle, and of course the core. Now in terms of crust, the main discovery here is that the crust is just a little bit thinner than expected, and it also might have 2 or 3 sublayers. So here it's believed to be about 20 kilometers to maybe maximum 37 kilometers in depth. Although this is of course on this part of the planet. It's actually quite possible that if we were to measure all of this from another part of Mars, such as for example where the ocean used to be, the crust might be a little bit thinner because we know that the ocean crust is usually thinner on Earth as well. Then underneath that we have the mantle. But on Earth, the mantle is divided into several parts. There is generally the upper mantle and the lower mantle. On Mars, however, it seems to be just one thing, mantle, extending to about 1500 kilometers in depth. And today we know that one of the reasons our planet is still sort of hot on the inside, and at the same time one of the reasons why our planet is able to maintain the magnetosphere, is actually because the lower mantle of planet Earth have a lot of high-pressure minerals on the inside that insulate the planet, allowing the iron core to stay much hotter than it would be otherwise. On Mars, however, because mantle seems to be more or less the same everywhere, it does not seem to insulate the core as well, which is maybe one of the reasons why the iron core of Mars cooled down just enough to prevent the planet from maintaining magnetosphere for a long time. But this is of course just a speculation for now, and nobody really knows until further studies. But one unexpected discovery when it comes to Martian crust was the fact that it was actually very highly enriched in various heat-producing isotopes that are normally responsible for warming up the planet. It had approximately 20 times more radioactive isotopes than the mantle underneath. And this would actually explain how Mars could potentially have volcanoes on the surface in the crust, but not actually have a very hot insides. And so the Martian volcanoes could actually be the result of the activity of these radioactive isotopes from the crust itself, not really from the mantle like they are usually on Earth. And because on Earth generates associated with plate tectonics, on Mars the volcanoes might produce in an entirely different way. Which might also explain why Saturn looks so extremely different from anything on Earth. This right here is the biggest volcano in the solar system, the Olympus Mons. And we definitely do not have anything like this on planet Earth or on any other object in the solar system. And lastly, when it comes to the iron core of Mars, first of all, the scientists were able to confirm that it also seems to be approximately 1800 kilometers in radius. And since this is much larger than the original predictions, it only implies that the core is very likely much less dense. Or it very likely contains a lot of lighter elements on the inside. Probably a lot more sulfur, oxygen, carbon, and so on. The study even suggests that it could be approximately half the density of the iron core of our own planet, simply because of the enrichment in these lighter elements. And this could one day help us explain why Mars lost its magnetosphere so quickly. And so overall, so far, the mission has been really productive. A lot of discoveries, a lot of confirmations, and a lot of mysteries as well. But for now, the scientists are really hoping that before InSight finally loses all of its power, they're able to detect at least one major Marsquake, at least 5 in magnitude or possibly even higher, and this would require some sort of an unexplained phenomena that we've never seen before. But we know that these phenomena and these unusual Marsquakes have happened in the past simply based on observations of a lot of different formations that already exist on the surface of Mars. And so if something like this is detected, it's going to create so many different S waves and P waves bouncing off the inner core, the mantle and so on, that it might actually help the scientists clearly see pretty much everything inside the planet. But for now, that's unfortunately all we know. Until future missions, or better even until a manned mission to Mars, we're not really going to learn much else about the core of Mars or about a lot of other internal mysteries of this beautiful planet. And so until we learn more, that's pretty much all I wanted to mention. Check out the relevant links in the description below, subscribe if you still haven't, share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, and maybe come back tomorrow to learn something else. Maybe support this channel on Patreon by joining the channel membership or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.
The rocket equation, it's a beautiful thing. No astronaut launches for space with their fingers crossed. That's not how we deal with risk. What I learned from 21 years as an astronaut is that the more you know, the less you fear. The reason I wanted to do this masterclass is to share the hidden depths of purpose that are behind space exploration. When the clock hits 0, start focusing in, thinking of nothing else but the moment that you're in. Study every system on a spaceship and then boil it down to what I call a one-pager. You've got to be able to solve your problems in one breath. You have to push your lungs forward through the drag of the atmosphere.
Flipping through magazines as a teen, it was impossible not to compare myself to the airbrushed faces and bodies on the pages. Today, these images have gone digital. And it's not just models in magazines anymore, because anyone can alter their appearance online. Want bigger lips, smaller waist, bigger biceps, bigger boobs, a six-pack? You got it. You can completely change your online image from the one staring back at you in the mirror. But that disconnect, the gap between real flesh and blood human to modified, idealized online persona, is starting to have an effect on how we see ourselves. And researchers are asking more questions about what these digital manipulations are doing to our perceptions of our bodies and self-image IRL. A growing number of studies show that social media can have a measurable negative impact on body image and self-esteem. Some research even suggests that scrolling through altered or filtered photos and videos on social media feeds may be a trigger for more serious mental health conditions like anorexia, bulimia, and body dysmorphic disorder.
Body dysmorphic disorder, BDD, is a condition in which people think there's something very wrong with their physical appearance. People with BDD obsess about these perceived imperfections. It's not just a fleeting thought or a few minutes a day. They think about it and worry about it a lot, typically between 3 and 8 hours a day. It's probably a little bit more common in women than in men. That's what we find in the general population studies.
BDD is only diagnosed when the perceived flaw in appearance is actually non-existent or only slight. But most people with BDD don't realize that the flaws they perceive are actually minimal or not even there. They believe the flaw is clearly noticeable and seems unattractive or ugly to others. And like Dr. Phillips said, BDD can be found in people of all gender identities. Unfortunately, there have only been a handful of nationwide studies into how common BDD really is in the general population. But these early studies have revealed startling numbers. It's estimated that BDD affects close to 2 to 3% of the population, and that's somewhere between 5 to 10 million people in the US alone.
So that makes it more common than obsessive compulsive disorder, anorexia nervosa, schizophrenia. So it's very under-recognized, underdiagnosed.
Every case of BDD is different, and they can range in severity. In some cases, it can be incredibly debilitating, to the point where a person withdraws completely from school, work, and social life, like Kitty.
I was spending hours in front of the mirror, obsessively picking at my skin, putting makeup on, taking it off because it wasn't right, and putting it back on again. And what I saw in the mirror was a monster. I just thought everyone would be horrified if they saw me, so it was just safer to stay at home.
This mental health disorder most often begins in early adolescence, and those with BDD often focus on multiple body parts. Some people who suffer from it have likened their experience to staring into a permanent funhouse mirror, where your self-image is wildly distorted by your own brain. Basically, people with BDD perceive themselves differently. In one of the first studies looking into this, researchers compared the fMRI brain scans of a small group of people with BDD to those without the disorder, and they found a clear difference. When viewing a batch of highly detailed photos of strangers and a batch of blurred images of those same strangers, individuals with BDD used the left side of their brains much more than the control group, and the left side is the part that processes detail. Those without BDD, or the control group, used the right side of their brain more, taking in a more holistic image, and they only switched to using their left side when processing the highly detailed images. And the researchers concluded that those with BDD focus more on the details than on the bigger picture. Basically, like one researcher put it, they were losing the forest for the trees.
I focus in on different areas of my face or my body or whatever, and then in my mind that creates a picture of what I look like. But of course that creates a distorted image of how I look, because certain features are distorted to be bigger or worse.
I think a major misconception is that BDD is just vanity. That trivializes.
One researcher focus more on the details, like image, and the left side, BDD strangers and scans in one of basically, people with BDD perceive themselves differently. In one of the first studies looking into this, researchers compared the fMRI brain scans of a small group of people with BDD to those without the disorder, and they found a clear difference. When viewing a batch of highly detailed photos of strangers and a batch of blurred images of those same strangers, individuals with BDD used the left side of their brains much more than the control group, and the left side is the part that processes detail. Those without BDD, or the control group, use the right side of their brain more, taking in a more holistic image, and they only switch to using their left side when processing the highly detailed images. And the researchers concluded that those with BDD focus more on the details than on the bigger picture. Basically, like one researcher put it, they were losing the forest for the trees.
I focus in on different areas of my face or my body or whatever, and then in my mind that creates a picture of what I look like. But of course that creates a distorted image of how I look because certain features are distorted to be bigger or worse.
Feel alive. We fly above the mountains day and night. We dive on the water purified. Every street is a road trip. With every sight we see, we feel alive.
I think a major misconception is that BDD is just vanity. That trivializes it, and it trivializes the suffering of people with BDD.
For an illness that was first described over a century ago, it's only been in the past few decades that a continued research effort has gone into better understanding this disorder. And there are still some key questions that researchers are trying to figure out, like what exactly causes BDD and what are its triggers once someone has it?
Now, the cause of BDD is very complex, and it's not any one thing that causes BDD. It's probably about 40 to 50% genetically based. The rest of BDD is due to, we think broadly in terms of environmental factors. That's a very big bucket.
These risk factors may include a lot of things, like being teased when you're young, societal messages dictating what you should look like, or, like we mentioned earlier, research now looking into whether hyper-edited images on social media have become a trigger as well. And this is something Dr. Phillips has seen change over her 30 years of studying BDD.
I think for some people it is, and we don't have good research studies on this issue. Studies in non-BDD groups have shown that certain forms of social media can worsen body image concerns, which in turn can worsen depression. In my own patients, my sense is that certain forms of social media can make BDD worse.
Social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat, where it's easy to compare your own appearance to that of others, might be more likely to worsen body image than platforms that don't focus on appearance or don't allow editing of one's face or body. And in all of these apps, there are built-in features that can alter your looks, like thinning your face, smoothing out your skin, or applying makeup.
We just need studies of social media in people with BDD specifically. And now, I think increasingly we see that certain forms of social media can be so distressing for people with BDD.
Like Kitty, for example, who used her own experience in her work with the Body Dysmorphic Disorder Foundation.
I would always say it's important to be mindful of how you're using anything, because when you've got BDD, almost anything could be triggering. So it's about learning to cope with these challenges and find new ways of managing them.
But platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok aren't all bad either. They can provide a space to raise awareness about things like BDD and create a stronger sense of community. And talking more openly about disorders like this and the role social media may play in perpetuating them helps tackle the stigma around these issues too. And the good news is that BDD is treatable. One of the most effective ways to treat it is with medications called SRIs. These can limit compulsive behaviors, lessen obsessions, depression, and anxiety over the perceived flaw, and also just make it easier to be around other people and to function well in daily life. Another treatment is a specialized form of cognitive behavioral therapy that focuses on identifying the patient's appearance-related thoughts and behaviors, and then applying cognitive restructuring, ritual prevention, and exposure techniques. Good treatment can be transformational for folks like Carly, who has dealt with BDD for over a decade.
I often think of my journey as it's been a little friend that's come with me. So from that 11-year-old little girl who had a demon, and she sort of latched onto me, and she obviously wanted to pick me apart. She was a bully. I like to think that from then to where we're at now, she's sort of become my friend. So I keep her at a distance, but when she does come and she will hurt me, I just have to remind her that she's only allowed a few hours, maybe a day max, and then she's got to go back.
Some who suffer from BDD may think the solution is undergoing cosmetic procedures to alter the flaw they're fixated on, but this usually doesn't improve their issue and can actually even make the fixation worse.
And the reason is that BDD is a body image problem. It's not a problem with actual appearance.
It's not really a body problem. It's a perception problem. Ultimately, we need more research. Body dysmorphic disorder is its own separate issue, but those who struggle with it may also struggle with an eating disorder, obsessive-compulsive symptoms, a great deal of anxiety, substance abuse, and even suicidal ideation. So the more we know about what's going on in the brains of those with it, the better equipped we'll be to help those who are dealing with BDD.
If you think someone may have BDD, it's important to take it seriously and encourage the person to get help.
Filters can be fun. Social media can be fun, and it's a great place to be creative. But I hope you don't see the way other people look, or the way a filter makes you look, and think that's how you should look. I know it's easier said than done, but this is the only body we get. So better to spend our time making friends with it than being at war with it, right? You are enough, just as you are. If you or someone you know is struggling with BDD or something similar, we've included resources in our description below for more information on where to find help. Thanks so much for watching Seeker's new series, Body Language. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if there's another health topic you want us to cover, leave us a comment down below, and I'll see you next time.
You created a business. Now, create videos for your business, easily and instantly, with Vimeo Create. Video to help you show off your products and bump up your sales. With hundreds of pre-made templates designed to get
When I was 6-year-old, I received my gifts. My first grade teacher had this brilliant idea. She wanted us to experience receiving gifts, but also learning the virtue of complimenting each other. So she had all of us come to the front of the classroom, and she bought all of us gifts and stacked them in the corner. And she said, why don't we just stand here and compliment each other? If you hear your name called, go and pick up your gifts and sit down. What a wonderful idea, right? What could go wrong? Well, there were 40 of us to start with, and every time when I hear someone's name called, I would give out the heartiest cheer. And then there were 20 people left, and 10 people left, and 5 left, and 3 left. I was one of them. And the compliments stopped. Well, at that moment, I was crying, and the teacher was freaking out. And she was like, hey, would anyone say anything nice about these people? No one? Okay, why don't you go get your gift and sit down, so behave next year, someone might say something nice about you. Well, as I'm describing this to you, you probably know I remember this really well. But I don't know who felt worse that day. Was that me or the teacher? She must realize that she turned a team building event into a public roast for 3 6-year-olds. And without the humor, when you see people get roasted on TV, it was funny. There was nothing funny about that day. So that was one version of me, and I would die to avoid being in that situation again, to get rejected in public again. That's one version. Then fast forward 8 years, Bill Gates came to my hometown, Beijing, China, to speak, and I saw his message. I fell in love with that guy. I thought, wow, I know what I want to do now. That night, I wrote a letter to my family telling them by age 25, I will build the biggest company in the world, and that company will buy Microsoft. I totally embraced this idea of conquering the world, domination, right? And I didn't make this up. I did write that letter, and here it is. No, you don't have to read this through, and this is also bad handwriting, but I did highlight some keywords. You get the idea. So that was another version of me wanting to conquer the world. Well, then 2 years later, I was presented with the opportunity to come to the United States. I jumped on it, and because that was where Bill Gates lived, right? So I thought that was the start of my entrepreneur journey. Then fast forward another 14 years, I was 30. Nope, I didn't build that company. I didn't even start. I was actually a marketing manager for a Fortune 500 company, and I felt I was stuck. I was stagnant. Why is that? Where is that 14-year-old who wrote that letter? It's not because he didn't try. It's because every time I had a new idea, every time I wanted to try something new, even at work, I wanted to make a proposal, I wanted to speak up in front of people in a group, I felt there was this constant battle between the 14-year-old and the 6-year-old. One wanted to conquer the world, make a difference. Another was afraid of rejection. And every time, that 6-year-old won. And this fear even persisted after I started my own company. I mean, I started my own company when I was 30. If you want to be Bill Gates, you got to start sooner or later, right? When I was an entrepreneur, I was presented with an investment opportunity, and then I was turned down. And that rejection hurt me. It hurt me so bad that I wanted to quit right there. But then I thought, hey, would Bill Gates quit after a simple investment rejection? Would any successful entrepreneur quit like that? No way. And this is where it clicked for me. Okay, I can build a better company, I can build a better team or better product, but one thing for sure, I gotta be a better leader. I gotta be a better person. I cannot let that 6-year-old keep dictating my life anymore. I have to put him back to his place. So this is where I went online and looked for help. Google was my friend. I searched, how do I overcome the fear of rejection? I came up with a bunch of psychology articles about where the fear and pain are coming from. Then I came up with a bunch of rah-rah inspirational articles about, don't take it personally, just overcome it. Who doesn't know that? But why was I still so scared? Then I found this website by luck. It's called rejectiontherapy.com. Rejection therapy was this game invented by this Canadian entrepreneur. His name is Jason Comley. And its basically the idea is for 30 days, you go out and look for rejection. And every day get rejected at something, and by the end, you desensitize yourself from the pain. And I love that idea. I said, you know what, I'm gonna do this, and I'll film myself getting rejected 100 days. And I came up with my own rejection ideas, and I'll make a video blog out of it. And so here's what I did. This is what the blog looked like. Day one, borrow $100 from stranger. So this is where I went to where I was working. I came downstairs and saw this big guy sitting behind a desk. You know, he looked like a security guard. So I just approached him, and I was just walking, and that was the longest walk in my life. I just hair at the back of my neck standing up. I was sweating, and my heart was pounding. And I got there and said, hey, sir, can I borrow $100 from you? And he looked up, he's like, no. Why? And I said, no, I'm sorry. Then I turned around and just ran. I felt so embarrassed. But because I filmed myself, so that night I was watching myself getting rejected. I just saw how scared I was. I looked like this kid in Sixth Sense. I saw dead people. But then I saw this guy, he wasn't that menacing. He was a chubby, lovable guy, And he even asked me why. In fact, he invited me to explain myself. And I could have said many things. I could have explained, I could have negotiated. I didn't do any of that. All I did was run. I felt, wow, this is like a microcosm of my life. Every time I feel the slightest rejection, I would just run as fast as I could. And you know what? The next day, no matter what happens, I'm not gonna run. I'll stay engaged. Day 2, request a burger refill. This is where I went to a burger joint, I finished lunch, and I went to the cashier and said, hey, can I get a burger refill? And he was all confused. I was like, what's a burger refill? I said, well, just like a drink refill, but what's a burger? And he said, sorry, we don't do a burger refill, man. So this is where rejection happened. I could have run, but I stayed. I said, well, I love your burger, I love your joint, and if you guys do a burger refill, I would love you guys more. And he said, well, okay, I'll tell my manager about it. And maybe we'll do it, but sorry, we can't do this today. Then I left. And by the way, I don't think they ever done burger refill. I think they're still there. But the life and death feeling I was feeling the first time was no longer there, just because I stayed engaged, because I didn't run. I said, wow, great, I'm already learning things. Great. And then day 3, getting Olympic donuts. This is where my life was turned upside down. I went to a Krispy Kreme. It's a donut shop mainly in the southeastern part of the United States. I'm sure they have some here too. And I went in and said, can you make me donuts that look like Olympic symbols? Basically, you interlink 5 donuts together. I mean, there's no way they could say yes, right? The donut maker took me so seriously. So she put out a paper, started jotting down the colors and the rings. It's like, how could I make this? And then 15 minutes later, she came out with a box that looked like Olympic rings. And I was so touched. And I just couldn't believe it. And that video got over 5 million views on YouTube. The world couldn't believe that either. And because of that, I was in newspapers and talk shows and everything, and I became famous. A lot of people started writing emails to me and saying, what you're doing is awesome. But fame and notoriety did not do anything to me. What I really want to do was learn and to change myself. So I turned the rest of my 100 days of rejection into this playground, into this research project. I wanted to learn, see what I can learn. And then I learned a lot of things. I discovered so many secrets. For example, I found if I just don't run, if I got rejected, I could actually turn a no into a yes. And the magic word is why. So one day, I went to a stranger's house, had this flower in my hand, and I said, knocked on the door, I said, hey, can I plant this flower in your backyard? and he said, no. But before he could leave, I said, hey, can I know why? And he said, well, I have this dog that would dig up anything I put in the backyard. I don't want to waste your flower. If you don't do this, go across the street and talk to Connie. She loves flowers. So that's what I did. I went across and knocked on Connie's door, and she was so happy to see me. And then half an hour later, there's this flower in Connie's backyard. I'm sure it looks better now. But had I left after the initial rejection, I would have thought, well, it's because the guy didn't trust me. It's because I was crazy, because I didn't dress up well, I didn't look good. It was none of those. It was because what I offered did not fit what he wanted. And he trusted me enough to offer me a referral, using sales term. I converted that referral. Then one day, I also learned that I can actually say certain things and maximize my chance to get a yes. So for example, one day I went to a Starbucks and asked the manager, hey, can I be a Starbucks greeter? He's like, what's a Starbucks greeter? I said, do you know those Walmart greeters? Those people who say hi to you before you walk in the store and make sure you don't steal stuff, basically. And I want to give a Walmart experience to Starbucks customers. Well, Well, I'm not sure that's a good thing, actually. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's a bad thing. And he was like, oh, yeah, this is how he looked. His name is Eric. He's like, I'm not sure. This is how he was hearing me. I'm not sure. Then I asked him, is that weird? He's like, yeah, it's really weird, man. But as soon as he said that,